That's not expected, and it shouldn't be expected, quite frankly. We give leaders what they need to be able to fish, to be able to find solutions on their own. And in many cases, you have to be clever enough to realize that you should be capturing it right now, because tomorrow there's going to be a decision. And if you didn't capture it today, it's gone.
Yeah, we can't go back in time and start logging it.
Something that's very much expected from everybody that's in the military is that you're willing to put the needs of the organization in front of your own personal needs, even if it means that you're going to pay the ultimate sacrifice in doing that.
Behind every value creation plan, there's a data problem nobody wants to talk about. Fragmented systems, metrics nobody trusts, and decisions made on gut feel dressed up as analysis. Welcome to the PE Data Guy. Each week, host Graham Crawford talks to the operating partners, advisors, and practitioners who are doing the work inside portfolio companies. If you care about what actually drives returns in the market, then you're in the right place. The PE Data Guy starts now. Most people think private equity is about buying companies. My guest today would say it's really about buying decision systems. Paul Evangelista is the Chief Data Officer at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where leadership is forged under pressure and the cost of a bad decision isn't a missed quarter, it's the lives of your fellow soldiers. He's spent decades in operations, research, and decision science, and now sits at the intersection of data, command, and execution. Today, we're talking about why decision literacy comes before data literacy, what PE firms miss when diligence focuses only on numbers, and how enterprise value is ultimately a function of how fast and how truthfully an organization can make decisions. Paul, welcome to the show. It's such an honor to have you on here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Graham. No, it's a pleasure to be here.
So we were introduced by a mutual friend, and I was immediately fascinated by not only your background, but also your role. Can you go a little more into what you currently do and what's involved in it and the path you took to get there?
Yes, no, I'd be happy to. So currently the Chief Data Officer for the United States Military Academy. Really, I would frame it as the Chief Data and Analytics Officer because it gets into a ton of different analytics types of activities. Our office is actually called the Office of Data and Analytics. But before I get into the actual office and what we do, I'll just give you kind of a brief background on, your question about how it came about and my path to get there. So I've been an Army officer for 30 years. I'm getting ready to transition this spring into a different career. During that 30-year experience, I started off as a engineer officer. That's what I was commissioned as. So it's operations, everything that people think of when they think of the Army, troop leading, going to the field, all that kind of stuff. Deployed as a company commander to Iraq in 2003. And then shortly after that, I was given an opportunity to go to graduate school and really change my career path in the Army. So I changed my career path at that time to a field that's called Operations Research and Systems Analysis. And in that career path, I was given the opportunity to do a variety of things, everything from serving as an instructor at West Point to deploying to Afghanistan a couple of different times and serving as an operations research analyst in theater, and then ultimately coming back to West Point for the final part of my career. During that second tour at West Point, I was fortunate enough to be selected as what they call an academy professor in the Department of Systems Engineering. So I've taught almost every course within that department. And then in 2020, COVID hit. So when COVID hit, they stood up a small team of operations research analysts, and I had the good fortune of being part of that team. And we led a number of different studies that supported decisions for the leadership here. Some of the big decisions that had to be made were, when would we bring cadets back? We had to do predictive analysis on how many cadets we expected to be infected by the disease, because that had all kinds of implications regarding infrastructure, regarding potential infections of the community, and making these decisions to bring cadets back. And again, that had implications for infrastructure, had implications for potential infections in the community. But it was that experience that gave me an opportunity to interact with a lot of the senior leaders about that time. They were starting to think a lot more serious about data at the academy, and they wanted a chief data officer. So they offered me the job. It was a great opportunity. And that was in the spring of 2021. And it was a totally new start. One of the more unsettling aspects of the job was when I started, nobody could tell me what to do. They didn't really understand what should somebody that we call a chief data officer do. So they gave me a team. I was able to name the office. We call it the Office of Data and Analytics. And I was able to actually define the functions of the office. And there's three functions that we settled on. The first function is empowering leaders at all levels with data and analytics. And I oftentimes tell people that's about trying to make sure that we give leaders what they need to be able to fish, to be able to find solutions on their own. There's many instances where we actually give them the analysis or the data they need, but our preference is to develop a system, and with that information system, they can actually develop the answers to questions that they have. The second function that we support is kind of a classic function of operations research, and that's underpinning the strategic decisions of the academy with data and analytics. And those are kind of like the special one-offs, the unique problems that come to the academy where they think data and analytics can help.
What are some examples of those? Can you share any?
Sure. I'd be happy to share. There's been questions about whether or not we should scramble the cadets. And what that means is when you come in as a cohort and you're organized into your units, do you stay with that unit or do you scramble out of that unit at some point? There's been a lot of questions about the effects of various types of training experiences. Those can be really tough questions to answer because there's no structured experimental design that goes into those training experiences.
Multiple variables as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's all kinds of confounding variables and it can be very messy. So you're using a lot of subject matter expertise. You're trying to formulate as much of a factual background as you can so that people understood exactly what it is that happened. And then you're just trying to do the best you can to make an assessment. And then I would say probably some of the most important work that we have done really has centered on trying to understand how well our cadets do in the Army. And that's been a new start as well, where we've done is we've been able to pull data from the Army. A lot of it's performance-related data, and other types as well. And based upon that information, based upon their performance records as a cadet, and then also trying to understand where they stood from an admissions standpoint, that whole storyline from admissions to cadet performance to graduation and beyond. Can you detect patterns or trends that give us the ability to do a few things? One is pick the best candidates possible to come here to the academy. Secondly, try to tailor the best training experiences possible for these cadets as they move through the academy. And then also, what types of things do we need to change at the academy in order to, create the best officers possible. So that's a little bit about the journey and a little bit about the office and what it is that we focus on.
Yeah, what an incredible journey, and I'm sure the impact you've had across those years has been way beyond what you've described. So certainly, thank you very much for your service. Very much appreciated over here, and on behalf of anyone who's listening as well. For sure, it's a big chunk of your life you've devoted to serving the country. So thank you for that. I'm interested by the data set you described about the cadet performance. Like in my idealistic mind here, because people are in the job for a fixed period of time, and that's other than exceptional circumstances, that's going to be a fixed period of time. There's an opportunity there to track data all the way through, as you say, admissions, training, and then further into career. Is that data in good shape? Easy to get to in one centralized place? Like, I don't know, please tell me it works perfectly somewhere.
Oh, that has really been a huge part of the job. I don't know if I actually mentioned that the third function, managing data risk, we got into really this what the second function was, which was underpinning. The third function, I mentioned there's three of them, is managing data risk. And really that's the function where I talk to the team about exactly that question and making sure that the data is in the best condition possible to support everything it is that we need to do. And that goes from making sure that it's obviously very well organized, that there's not some kind of perishability risk that we're facing with the data. In addition to that, a huge part of that is anticipating the data that you're going to need tomorrow.
Right.
Because you can't grow that data immediately. And in many cases, you have to be clever enough to realize that you should be capturing it right now, because tomorrow there's going to be a decision. And if you didn't capture it today, it's gone.
We can't go back in time and start
exactly
it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's been just a tremendous amount of work to build out a structured data set that gives us the ability to tell the story that we want to tell, about our cadets. And then there's also sensitive data that, we've been able to gain access to. It's inside of really a secure computing enclave, but that's given us great insights as well, because that's where a lot of the Army performance data is kept. So to answer your question, it's, I was actually impressed with the state of the data when I took the job. It has been a long evolution where I think it was maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's,
Right.
a lot of the structured data started off as a Microsoft Access database. It eventually matured into, a Microsoft SQL Server database. And then today we're an Azure-based office. We use Databricks. We can reach into all sorts of different Army data sets. And I feel like we're pretty well equipped right now. And our structured data that describes that cadet experience is in pretty good shape. We're starting to actually pivot it a little bit into our unstructured data at this point. That's our new focus.
What sort of unstructured data are you collecting? Unstructured data always fascinates me. Again, I think in the modern age, as technology continues to advance, the opportunities from unstructured data continue to grow. I remember the big data revolution back in the sort of early 2010s, I think, around then, when we can just store much more than we used to. And but now the opportunities, especially with AI, to fill in the blanks and cut across some of the lack of structure and turn it into useful stuff. What sort of unstructured data are you collecting?
As you would imagine, at a place like this, where you have fully operational university type of function that's going on, all of the data that encompasses that. So you have all sorts of policy decisions. You have personnel decisions. You have historical artifacts. You have research artifacts. Those are all the different types of unstructured data that exists, across the entire enterprise. It is tremendously decentralized. It is organized in just a number of different ways. So what we're doing is we are attempting to use the technology that we have, and then also use the Army systems that we need to be following, and moving through a process of trying to get that information organized, labeled, trying to get retention policies put in place. And as I've oftentimes said to the team, let's not try to boil the ocean of unstructured data that's out there, because it would overwhelm us. But let's make sure we understand the big fish that are in that ocean, the really precious unstructured data that's in there. Make sure that is first and foremost well preserved, safe, and then we start growing, out from there. So this is the journey we're on right now. It's a tough one.
Yeah, you're right about the big fish. And I often say this to people as well. Like, data in itself can never be a business case, right? There has to be a reason.
Yes.
And if you're going fishing in the ocean of unstructured fish, it's particularly tricky conditions, right? And the effort and the technology and the time taken to put the net around that and turn it into and put it on the plate,
right,
is often a lot more. So even more is the case that we need to understand why we're doing this before we set off from the dock. And I enjoy a good analogy. It's a wonderful time. As you know, like, there's a PE focus to the podcast, and listeners are involved in that area. I'm fascinated by the similarities and differences here, because in my uneducated from the outside mind in the military, decisions more often have immediate consequence, and the price of hesitation could be higher, and the price of incorrect decisions could be higher. As I work in private equity and compare it to the rest of the private sector, I find that comparatively, decisions compress a lot more quickly, and there's a lot more accountability in a private equity situation, especially either side of a liquidity event, when enterprise value is on the line, when any investment in technology, data, or anything else, in fact, needs to have super clear return on investment before we do it. And there's much less room for theater. Would you see private equities kind of like the closest, but not quite there, the closest civilian analog to command work?
So, I don't know if I could make an assessment and say that it's the closest, but what I can do for you is I can tell you what some of the similarities are. Private equity is something that I've studied for a little over the last year, and I've talked to a number of different leaders that are in that space, gaining an appreciation for the variety of different business models, and one relatively generic business model that they all pursue. One thing that does strike me is that the way that these PE firms organize and the way that they establish relationships with their portfolio companies, it does remind me a lot of what we often refer to as combined arms maneuver in the military. And by combined arms maneuver, what that means is you're taking military units of different types. You could be an aviation unit, it could be an engineer unit, could be a logistics unit, a field artillery unit, and you're bringing that together as one team.
Right.
And then that one team needs to focus on a singular mission. It's a singular overarching mission, but then within the team, each one of those combined arms members, they have their own unique mission. They have their own unique functions. They have their own unique competencies. But the reason that we do it is for synergy, because by bringing all of that together, you're going to get a synergistic effect. I mean, you're going to get the tools that you need that can help the overall team to pursue.
And presumably you design those individual objectives in such a way that none of them are in a contrarian way to any of the others. The idea is that they're all contributing in their own unique way towards the overall goal,
yes,
right?
You absolutely are trying. You're trying. I mean, and that's something that you definitely need to make sure you do. One of the principles that we support and embrace is called adjacent unit coordination. So coordinating with, your unit to your left, your unit to your right is something that is very, very much encouraged. But, when you talk about like the command and control structure of a PE firm and what they're doing, it reminded me a lot of this concept that we have in the military that's called mission command. And really what mission command is about is it's about a centralized intent. Again, a centralized mission with decentralized execution, and how to achieve that and what kind of principles you need to reinforce. There's 7 principles. And this is, one aspect that I wanted to make sure I got right. And I thought through before this discussion. So competence is a huge one. And that's obviously, every member of the team, needs to be capable of doing what it is they say they can do. And if they can't, they got to have the courage to come forward and say, hey, I can't, and here's why. That's a limit that I have.
Is there more room for that in the military compared to? I mean, that's, as a former private sector employee, that's a great way to sign your death warrant, like in terms of your employment at the company, which speaks, I think, to a little bit of the differences that we're seeing.
So the competence factor, it's something that you have to grow it over time, and you earn it in the military. You really do, and one of the battalion commanders that I worked for that really kind of embraced this mission command principle, what he was most ruthless about was when you didn't come clean for a shortcoming. He didn't care if you had a shortcoming. He did, and it would need to be addressed, or, if there was something that you were tasked to do and you came up short. It was more about, you got to get to him quickly. You got to tell him why you came up short, and then come with recommendations on how you're going to overcome it. If you hid that, which some people tried to do, he was ruthless, absolutely ruthless. That's probably, in my opinion, one of the good ways that I saw, competence being, reinforced. So competence is huge. Trust, it's so important.
I can only imagine, yeah.
I think it is. It's the most important ingredient for any type of meaningful relationship. If trust doesn't exist, or if there's a breach, you're never going to get that synergy that you need. And then shared understanding is another big piece, understanding your entire environment and having a shared appreciation of that across the organization. Commander's intent is another huge piece of mission command. And that's where, at the top level, the commander describes what the overarching goal is. And the reason that that's so important is because it cascades into the remaining principles. So one is mission orders. That's telling people what to do without telling them how to do it.
Yeah.
Underwriting disciplined initiative. So again, you go back to that intent principle where you're communicated clear intent. And then what you're not just hoping for, but what you're expecting is that your subordinates are going to exercise initiative. They're going to see opportunities. They're going to seize them because they see that opportunity is consistent with the intent. And then lastly, you have to have leadership that's willing to underwrite risk. I mean, they have to be able to accept it, They have to be able to know that sometimes negative consequences will happen, and you do the best you can to manage them, to mitigate against them. But at the same time, too, you have to be able to accept the potential, risk.
That sums up leadership for me, and is the way I've always thought about it. Like, the art of leadership is effectively the art of making decisions based on incomplete information and having to accept that you'll never truly be able to know if you made the right or wrong decision because you didn't walk down the other path.
Right.
It's one of the hardest things to deal with from a leadership perspective, for sure. And the commander's intent actually sprung to mind. I spent a chunk of my career at Capital One, and one of the things that they did really well, and it helps that the CEO was the founder, right? It's rare to have a founder-led company of that size. He would take 1 week every year to tell everybody in the company firsthand, in his own words. It used to be an in-person, and then during COVID, it transitioned to a series of virtual sessions across a week, which actually scaled a lot better. So he ended up keeping afterwards. But he would take the time, a whole week out of his diary, so that everyone in the company could hear directly from him. Here is my overall intent. This is where I think the world is going. This is how I think I'm moving the company to get there. And here's what's important to me. And it cut out so much of the telephone game, like through the ranks, that I've seen at other companies.
Right. Yeah, it's hugely important. Hugely.
Incredibly valuable. And it helps people make better decisions independently, I think, as you were saying. And many companies don't do that. And as a result, kind of drift without consequence, because other things come in that dilute the mission. And I'm sure PE firms find this a lot of times in portfolio companies. If lack of clear commander's intent is there, if lack of clear objectives are there, if teams aren't strategically aligned for that synergistic output that you talk about, then companies just drift. And it doesn't mean they drift into bankruptcy or they drift into failure, because it's perfectly possible for a company without the right setup, without the right data, right, to profitably drift
yes.
for ages,
right?
And not see the missed opportunities that are sitting under their noses. But so there's a whole bunch of similarities in there. Can we talk about some differences? Are there ways, like you said, you've been spending time with people in PE and other private sector folks as well? What do you think is some of the biggest things that the private sector could learn from military and do better by adapting?
So, I think it runs both ways. I think that the private sector could probably stand to benefit, from a number of lessons from the military. But I also think too that the military could examine the private sector and try to gain an appreciation from them as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I know, for example, I'll get back to that question, but just to talk for a minute about what the military can learn from the private sector, is that the military has long been a very hierarchical system. And you actually wear your rank. I'm not wearing right now.
Right.
You wear it. You see it. So you know exactly where everybody stands in the hierarchy. And then you're given a position in the hierarchy that gives you a certain ability to direct, communicate, privilege to communicate to senior leaders that are, your immediate bosses. So it's hierarchical. It's very formal. It has been that way for a very long time. And there's a lot of traditions that relate to that. But one of the things that the military has realized is that sometimes that strict hierarchy can actually stymie initiative. It can stymie free thinking. And if you truly want, a learning organization, which I know that every business leader, every military leader wants a learning organization. That's what they're hoping to ultimately achieve. You have to find ways to flatten. You have to find ways to open up lines of communication. I would say that is probably the one thing that I have personally seen the military embrace over and over. And there's certain units that do it really, really well and have always done it really well. Special forces units, they completely flatten. They are on a first name basis, so they try to get rid of that rank barrier, and they operate much more as a team of very highly trained and highly professional colleagues. It's just the way it's in their culture. So that's one thing that I've actually seen the military learn from, honestly, our civilian counterparts. But I guess on the flip side of that, so going back to what can the private sector potentially, learn from the military, I definitely think that mission command concept is such a strong leadership model. That is something that our civilian counterparts could stand to benefit from. I think there's very strong emphasis in the military on values. What are your values? What are the core values of your organization? I can tell you that is something that we hold to be very dear, and it's important to us. And we always strive to pursue our values. And you'll oftentimes see when somebody makes a mistake, somebody's talking to them about the mistake and trying to rehabilitate, they'll often reinforce, the values. What are the values that we have? How did your actions, reflect those values? The one thing that, and I don't know how you could ever expect this from the civilian sector, but it's something that's very much expected from everybody that's in the military, is that you're willing to put the needs of the organization in front of your own personal needs, even if it means that, you're going to pay the ultimate sacrifice in doing that. That's not expected, and it shouldn't be expected, quite frankly. I mean, that would be kind of crazy. But how do you create the type of trust, camaraderie, and really value-centric behavior that you're after? Because I know, actually, that when you can get to that point across an organization, that's when you're going to truly be able to start hitting your potential. Until you get to that point, you're always limited. You're always operating at something that is beneath the true potential of your organization. You just are.
Yeah, absolutely fair enough. It's funny, I throw my mind back to various tough situations that have happened across the private sector. And, sometimes it's not uncommon for someone to, in an attempt to lower the temperature of the room, say, okay, well, we're not saving lives here, or lives aren't at stake here. So it's a pressure release valve that isn't always available to you in your line of work. So it's certainly something that people remind themselves of. On the flip side, I will say, I was speaking to an endocrinologist a couple of years back, and he was talking about, in particular, stress-induced thyroid conditions. And he was observing something. This guy I think he's in his 70s, close to retirement. He was just talking about the general state of the world. He said to me, citing some research, that there's 5 times as many stress-induced thyroid conditions as there used to be, and corporate America is the cause of most of them. In his book, and he said, 30 years ago, the only people who would come to him with stress-induced thyroid conditions were people who returned from the Gulf. And now it's people down the road in the corporate offices are coming. I'm not suggesting, I'm not trying to draw comparisons or suggest equivalence in any way, but it's something I always had back of mind, even when private sector's hitting that pressure release valve of at least we're not saving lives here. Sometimes physiologically they're reacting as if their life is under threat, interestingly, such as become the kind of stress and strain and the...
Sure. Well, it could certainly be their way of life, their quality of life. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, that's real.
Yeah, there's
real.
pressure. Like I said, absolutely not equivalent, but there's definitely been a shift in people's experience in the private sector. 2 of the things that I see in portfolio companies can be a cause of either missed opportunity or carrying risk. One of them is fuzzy strategy, and then regardless of the data you've got underneath it, you're then going to start struggling. The second is companies with clear strategy, but that lack insufficient data to be able to measure progress against that clear strategy. So you've got fuzzy strategy with good data, or clear strategy with fuzzy data. Which of those do you think is worse? Or can you see having more kind of causing more issues?
I would be very concerned. The one that would scare me the most would be the fuzzy strategy, quite frankly, because the other one I know you can fix. You got a clear strategy, but you have a bit of a data problem. I can very clearly see the way that could get fixed, especially if the strategy is sound, the business model is sound. When you have a fuzzy strategy, that implies to me that you may not have a sound business strategy. And if you don't have a sound business strategy, that's bad. That's where you end up with, a business that's potentially fragile to, some sort of a environmental condition, something that occurs that you didn't expect. You end up in a bad spot. I would pick the clear strategy, bad data, because I think you can fix it.
Me too. And I think I would find that a whole lot easier to fix as well. And to some extent, I think in that first situation, it's almost like a false situation I'm presenting, because I don't think fuzzy strategy, clear data actually exists, because where I've seen fuzzy strategy, data teams often end up running around and they just collect everything because they don't have enough clarity about what's important. So that's actually when you get data that's most fragmented and most all over the place, because they're desperately trying to assume strategy. And as you know, when you bring assumption in, like, people walk down many different paths, either as individuals or collectively, and then come out the other side with like vomited dashboards all over, like just vomit dashboards everywhere. Like, I'm trying desperately to have some impact because I can't work out what's important. So that's often the situation where you get these data products which have, like, I don't know, 100 different views or charts on them, because, you know, if you're blindfolding me before putting me in front of the dartboard, then my strategy to hedge against that is I'm going to throw hundreds of darts, in the hope that one of them hits. Yeah, it's wonderful. I want to come back to trust, and which you said was the most important thing. And trust in the military is built with, you know, repeated performance under stress with a similar group of people and a clear set of guidelines and values. In private equity world, you don't always have that, especially not quickly. You know, I've been in situations where a company's acquired, PE comes in, they bring people in. Trust is not at all-time highs. Let me just say when that's happened. Yeah. So are there some tips that presumably during the military, like, new leaders are introduced, or new leadership or new objectives are introduced? Like, what are some of the methods that PE firms might deploy in that space when it might even be a hostile environment that they're coming into, because the previous or the current employees of the company are not always assuming good intent?
I think one of the most important things you can do to build trust is to establish clear expectations and continue to revisit and make sure that those expectations are understood. I had a boss one time who said, all of life's frustration can be attributed to an unfulfilled expectation. You expected something to occur, it didn't, and it makes you upset. And I think it is very true. So in pursuing that and trying to understand what are the expectations, one thing that I know that every leader that I've ever been around in the military, they write them down and they communicate them. They think about them really hard. It's not a tome. It's usually 1 to 2 pages where they clearly lay out specific expectations for the organization. They may supplement that also with some sort of a leadership philosophy. And I don't want to use the word rules of engagement. I kind of think of it that way, but maybe you know, just some general operating rules, you know, that you're going to adhere to, you know, in terms of maybe like accessibility to leaders, processes for decision making, you know, respect for others' opinions, and so forth. When you establish, I think, those expectations, and when you clearly communicate the philosophy, and then the most important part is then your actions have to follow through and follow what's actually been written on paper. You know, so your operational behavior has to match your declarative behavior. That's hugely important. That's when I have seen trust emerge. Because even though something may be disappointing, if you've told somebody that's what the expectation is, you know, it's very difficult to come back and say, hey, I didn't know that rule. You go back to the point that you made about fuzzy strategy. I mean, the reason why a fuzzy strategy can be so damning is that the expectations are completely unclear. You know, so you have people marching in a whole bunch of different directions. They don't understand what objectives they should be pursuing or how they should be pursuing them, and that becomes very problematic. That would be my recommendation. Just, you know, communicate clearly and very clearly communicate the expectations and the philosophy.
Yeah, and I think, again, in the fear-based economy that we're in, people's immediate fear is my job, right? What's going to happen here? And I've been in various situations where the questions have been asked in the private sector. You can never give the answer of, like, there will never be layoffs, right? Because there will always be layoffs, right? Or reorganization or whatever it might be. Those things will always happen. But one thing that can be really powerful to offer is say, I'm not immediately planning any redundancies, or I'm not immediately planning any layoffs in the next 3-4 months, whatever it might be. And then you at least give people a window of some certainty or some, which is good. And as you say, underlining what they're there to do, like, private equity can have a bad reputation. And I think part of that is, in what I talked about before, like people hedge against the volatility of losing their job, and they do so by like building alliances, withholding information, like basically insulating themselves a little bit. And typically in an acquisition scenario, that all gets cut away and people feel very exposed. I think that's part of the reason PE has a bad reputation in some circles. But ultimately, no PE firm is acquiring a company to run it into the ground, or to make it worse, or to make it less profitable, or to bring less clear strategy. There's often a lot of value, I think, in being open about, hey, should we acquire this company? Or now that we've acquired this company, here are our intentions, right? Even if those the incumbent employees don't necessarily agree with or do, I think there's a lot of value in being straightforward with the intentions, particularly when they send people like me in to say, give me all your data, I'm going to look at it. That's certainly something I always look to do with clients and client portcos, is to build that psychological safety. And the only way to build that psychological safety and trust is to say, this is actually what I'm here to do, right? And often the case for me is, I'm here to make your job easier. I'm here to make you more efficient. I'm here so you can focus more of your time on higher value tasks, and not spending 16 hours a week running around combining Excel spreadsheets with each other, and then figuring why the formula that somebody else who left the company 2 years ago that was written doesn't work anymore. Right? That's not the best use of the best use of time for a talented analyst. So often that's the real and I've found being able to engender that trust by being more open about what we're trying to do. Pastors New, have you got anything in mind that you're thinking about? Anything that you're finding exciting as you kind of look to the other side of the fence?
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement, for sure. I mean, it's an interesting period of time. I've got a matter of weeks left where the transition will be quite imminent for sure.
How does that feel after 30 years?
There's a part of it I feel satisfied. Sometimes I feel like there's new freedom that will, be emerging. There's things I know that I'll miss, about being in the military and being around, like-minded people. But at the same point too, it's inevitable. I mean, nobody's a member of the military for life. It's not designed to work that way. You can spend a pretty good chunk of time doing it, but it's just not designed that way. I'm very grateful, very, very grateful for the opportunities that I've been given, both in terms of education as well as the jobs that I've been exposed to. I've been able to do everything with regards to operations research and systems engineering and data science and data leadership, and do that in support of the military mission. I just feel very, very fortunate that they gave me that opportunity and trusted me to serve in those capacities, whether that was as a analyst, as a instructor, as a professor that was leading an academic program, or in my current job now as the chief data officer for the academy. So yeah, just feel very grateful as well. But then, just excited for the future. The thing that excites me the most, quite honestly, is the opportunity to get around business leaders that are interested and passionate about making better decisions from data and analytics. I mean, that's the place where I would like to find myself. And, I'm excited to see, what that brings and what types of decisions those are. And a lot of what I've done, I've studied, I've researched, I've learned, and I'm excited to see it applied.
Yeah, from my perspective, there's a great need for those abilities out in the private sector, and I know we've only just scratched the surface today of all the many things that you've been involved in, and all the many great successes you have that would transfer so well across to the private sector. So I serve as no ambassador of the private sector, but still look forward to welcoming skills and talents like yours into the fray. And thanks so much for spending the time. I know you have a lot on still, even in your closing week. So I appreciate you taking the time to share your story and share your insights with me and with the listeners today. And this won't be the last time we talk, I'm sure. I'm looking forward to staying connected as we both continue our journeys.
Yes, thank you, Graham. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Take care. All the best.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the PE Data Guy, the place where private equity meets data. Please forward this episode to your favorite private equity friend. Thanks for listening. See you next time.